ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Exceptional Conservative Show, live from the nation's capital. That's Washington, D.C., to you and me. We are not ashamed of the good news of conservatism, for it is the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrant. I'm yours truly this evening, Ken McClenton. Mary Brockman, my bouncer-in-chief, is in the chat roll at TECNTV.com. Muchas gracias to you, ladies and gentlemen. Mary Brockman. Listen, Mary Brockman's my bouncer-in-chief. If you diss her, you diss me, you will be whoop, 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 dismissed from our program. We have a very big program tonight, and I'm extremely honored with a tremendous opportunity of discussion. A member of the Guyana National Assembly, member of the Parliament, is scheduled to talk with us this particular evening about Guyana, as to whether it is a failed cooperative state or the promise of freedom for the diaspora. He is none other than the Honorable Lenox Shuman. He is Deputy Speaker for the Parliament. He is also Chairman of Liberty and Justice Party in Guyana. We look forward to a tremendous conversation with him. We want to get into some of the details as to why he started his party, Liberty and Justice, and as well, is there hope for the cooperative state, which seems to have failed for more than 50 years. And just like we asked that very same question of liberal cities here in America, like Detroit and Chicago and Washington, D.C., that have failed for an extended period of time because of public policies and political party, we have to extend that discussion to Guyana, and we're looking forward to a tremendous conversation with him, as I said earlier. Honorable Lenox Shuman. To follow up after the Honorable Member of the Parliament attends to our discussion, Onique Persaud will be joining us. She is Stop Communism in Guyana. She'll be joining us in the latter part of this particular hour, and we're looking forward to a tremendous conversation with her about Guyana. And in addition, of course, in the latter hour of our program, the segment I truly look forward to every year, coming into our Merry Christmas season, Janis Hall, the J Hall World Report. We have much to talk about in terms of Israel and not being able to complete a budget, thus instituting a new election. There they go again. Also, South Korea has banned parties of more than 5 people coming together in an assembly because of COVID-19 concerns. So we are uniquely concerned about what that impact would be on the United States. In addition, I will tell you in our second hour that the President of the United States will probably veto the COVID-19 relief bill. And there are a number of reasons as to why, including the fact that corporations and party loyalists or the tech gurus out there got sizable portions of the COVID relief, while Americans will be scheduled to receive $600. That's not workable. Not when the majority of America has been out of work since March because of the liberal policies of major states and cities. And in addition to that, threats of evictions have increased dramatically. In Washington, D.C., there was a court case against Mayor Muriel Bowser that she lost. She doesn't have the constitutional right to stop evictions. So, the landlords actually challenged her, and she lost that challenge in court. And that bodes that if the mayor of the District of Columbia loses that one, then that could be the message sent to the rest of America that you cannot stop evictions because your mayor or your governor decides that COVID is of such unique pandemic level that they must stop you from going to work. Yeah, I think there's going to be another case, and that'll be the case against most of these states and cities by workers who have lost their jobs, and many of the businesses have shut down. So we'll be talking about that in the second hour as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you again to the Exceptional Conservative Show. And without further ado, you all know what we do at this particular hour of the night. It has everything to do with this gorgeous flag that flies around the world as a beacon of light and harmony and peace, and as well that we have a pledge of allegiance to it, as we are one nation under God. And it has everything to do with the fact that God bless America, and it's time now for America to bless God. We're going to ask that you take all the hats and things off of your head, put your right hand over your heart, and pledge of allegiance to the United States of America. And we have our children queued up. You know what to do, kids. Take it away. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you 2 things that you need to do with your kids every single day.
Here we go. Face your parents. Ready, begin.
There we are, ladies and gentlemen. It is always a great joy to see our children actually do the Pledge of Allegiance right before our very eyes. And unfortunately, many parents don't take the opportunity to teach their children the Pledge of Allegiance. They wait until those kids actually get into the classrooms of America. And in so doing, many of them don't have the opportunity of knowing how patriotic this nation is and the reasons for the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to encourage that you do 2 things every single day with your children. 2. Number 1, pray with your children. Always remember to teach them to put God first. And then secondly, pledge with your children. Pray with your children, pledge with your children every single day. Not only will you turn their world around, but when they go into the world, they will turn it around as well. Lenox Shuman is considered a renegade in his country. He is a man who has spoken augustly in opposition to many policies in Guyana. He's looking for a greater hope of liberty and freedom, so much so that he started his own political party called Liberty and Justice. He is elected speaker, deputy speaker, of the Parliament, the National Assembly in Guyana. And we are excited to have him with us tonight. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we want to introduce to some and present to others the Honorable Lenox Shuman, who is chairman of the Liberty and Justice Party of Guyana. Mr. Shuman, we are honored and thankful for your presence with us this particular evening.
Well, good evening, Ken. I'm really happy to be here. Let me apologize for not at least having the opportunity to be on your program at the earlier proposed date. Time simply got compressed on us. It has been a bit of a hectic year, but I'm very happy to be here, to be able to have some exchanges and share some ideas. Maybe I'll learn a few things also.
Well, I will probably learn a whole lot more from you than you will ever gain from me. But one of the first things that people spoke to me about you is that you are the real deal when it comes to speaking truth to power, unashamedly. And I wanted to ask, in first question, did you believe that you would be elected deputy speaker and a member of the Parliament?
Well, I'm driven by conviction, and I think this goes back to my roots. It is not in conventional terms, nor what I'd say modern day society. I'm an indigenous person from Guyana. I'm a member of the First Nations community. I'm a previous chief and vice chairman of what is known as the National Two Shows Council. So there is a lot of spiritual guidance that actually brought me to where I am, and that continues to guide me. In modern day, I guess they call it divine intervention here and there. But for us, we've always had our core beliefs rooted and grounded in our ancestors and our lineage. So I've never really strayed far from that. I have always been convinced that I would be getting into Parliament because of
Yes.
how we approached the electoral process, how we approach people, how we approach policies. In terms of being elected the deputy speaker, it has never been an aspiration to get to that point.
Yes.
So getting there in itself, it is a very important marker for Indigenous peoples in Guyana. And I think it is also a very important marker for the country in a whole.
Now, when you say indigenous people, what people do you represent in terms of in your indigenous nature? Is it Indian? Is it the Afro-Caribbean? Which exactly group do you represent?
Well, in the U.S. they call it Indians. In Canada they call it the First Nations. In Guyana they used to call it the Amerindians, and then it was switched to the Indigenous peoples. Now it is back to Amerindians again, just recognizing that it is the first peoples of Guyana, the original inhabitants of the land.
Now, as one of the originalists, the country goes back quite a ways. Your people have watched the influx that came from the slave trades. You watched the influx of immigrants from India, and there seems to be a tremendous declination of peace amongst the groups that have come in after the originalists. What is the reason for the discontent from the two groups?
Well, we've also seen a misrepresentation of history. I think history is written by sometimes not necessarily the most literate, but the people who are most willing to do it.
Yes.
If you look at the indigenous people's history in Guyana, take for example the Arawakan civilization existed some 3,300 years ago.
Yes.
And that has been evidenced in the Barbies Mounds, which is on the coast of Guyana. So there is a great injustice that has been done to indigenous peoples in writing the history of the country in itself. The discontent between the other ethnicities in Guyana, it is simply a matter of struggling for power and dominance. We're looking for ethnic and racial dominance in certain cases, which I think drives us a bit too far apart for what should be one of our aspirations. Is for the Guyanese motto is one people, one nation, one destiny. Now, if you've got two immigrant groups, if I were to put it that way, fighting for ethnic dominance in a land that they pretty much were brought to, then I don't see that you're going to have a unifying formula. There have been political drives in trying to say, well, we're the only ones that can unite the country, we're the only ones. Well, look at the US. The US is one nation, but yet it is divided by politics. Politics in itself is a big divider.
Yes.
And it is unfortunate that we have to group religion in itself also as a big divider. And I say that not because I want to be insensitive to your viewers, but
Yes.
I have to be realistic with what is represented in many communities. Take, for example, you don't have Catholics mixing with Anglicans, mixing with Pentecostals, mixing with Seventh-day Adventists and all these things, and that is only one denomination. Now imagine if there was, and imagine if you were to bring 7 separate religious groups, and yet you've got so many divisions within one denomination of religion. How do you get unity under that? It becomes an impossible, it becomes a monumental task. I mean, Jesus Christ in himself could not unite a nation. He could not find the world to love him eternally. And thus, Christianity was born. But that in itself, if you were to, let's say, take away the Jesus complex from today's society and you try to say, well, we can unite a nation, who are we to think that we are better than the Son of God? It is an impossible task for us to do that, and it's somewhat arrogant of us to think that we can do that. So politics in itself, in Guyana, I think, when people start to fight to dominate each other, regardless of what context it is, whether it is labor, whether it is politics, religion, just everyday life activities, whether it is law enforcement, however you want to put it, you're never going to find the kind of compassion housed in those institutions that could unify a nation. There must be some other drive. I think that one of the things people look at when they look at the U.S., regardless of how divisive the politics get, the U.S. still is represented on one platform. And that is one thing that we want to drive in Guyana. So it doesn't matter what our political affiliation is, it doesn't matter what our religious affiliations are, that we have one drive, and that is to see our country, Guyana, stronger.
Well, and that's one of the great things about the United States, in the sense that we are a melting pot. And even if you are Catholic, Anglican, Baptist, Pentecostal, Muslim, Hindu, in the end, because we have the First Amendment for freedom of worship, we can be independent in terms of our worship, but also collectively honor each other's ability to worship, which leads me to a question regarding Liberty and Justice Party. Are you considered tolerant of all opinions and all expressions of free speech?
Well, we believe that the United Nations was formed for a very specific reason, which is to bring global unity to a certain extent and to bring peace and harmonious existence or coexistence. Now, when you look at the UN Charter, about the freedoms that are enshrined in that charter, about the respect for human rights and all those things, it is within that scope that we have established the Liberty and Justice Party. Liberty, you have to be liberated, but within structures. If there's no structure, if there are no structures, then what we have is chaos. So we have to be liberated so that we are tolerant. It is not only about breaking the chains, the physical change that bind us. It is about liberating your mind so that you're open and accepting of other people's religious identity, as you have said, is represented in the First Amendment of the American Constitution, is also enshrined in the Guyana Constitution, that we have a freedom of worship. We have a right to live in an environment free from discrimination of any sort. That is enshrined in the UN Charter, and all countries, 195 countries, have signed on to that charter, of which Guyana is one of them. When you look at justice, it is one of the greatest failures in society today. Every single country that you could go to, well, I'd say almost every single country, you go that there are people who are being treated unjustly. And in Guyana, it happens on a daily basis. We have enshrined in the Constitution the establishment of a Human Rights Commission, but yet that commission has never convened, it has never been named. And that in itself denies a lot of people their fundamental rights, because they cannot put the human rights context on the injustices that are being done to many people. And there is a group that struggles tremendously from the lack of that commission being convened, and that is the indigenous peoples, or the first peoples of Guyana.
Now, Honorable Lenox Shuman is with us tonight. He is Deputy Speaker in the Parliament in Guyana. He is also chairman of the Liberty and Justice Party, and we are completely honored to have him here tonight. Mr. Shuman, the United Nations has never necessarily been a friend to freedom and liberty, although it serves a sense of human rights. Many individual rights are taken from individuals as a result of an allegiance to the United Nations Human Rights Charter. And there are explicit rights that have the state with greater preference over the individual. Do you not believe that it's important for the Guyanese people, no matter whether they're indigenous or not, to have individual freedom rather than the state having authority over them?
Well, the interesting thing is that the state apparatus develops structures within all of us, within which all of us have to exist and coexist. I don't think at any point the state in itself should be infringing on those fundamental rights and freedoms. Think of it, if the state in itself infringed on the Constitution of the United States of America, what the people would do. So in that sense, I want to believe that the UN, the United Nations, when it was founded, and it was founded by actually a Canadian Prime Minister who led the charge on that, was to ensure that all humanity, within, at least as far as he could see at the time, enjoyed the same kind of freedoms, and that there was eternal, or hopefully some hope of eternal peace. But when you look at what the UN has evolved to today, yes, there are infringements where the UN in itself oversteps and overimposes its will, but it's not necessarily the UN oversteps and overimposes its will. If you look at the actions of the people or the nations on the UN Security Council, for example, it is just 5 nations that pretty much want to determine how the rest of the world should live.
Yeah.
Which I think is grossly unfair. You've got what I'd say, the voices of 190 being outweighed by the voices of the 5, and now we get into some deeper issues of resources, the distribution of resources, the accumulation of wealth, and I think it pretty much delves into capitalism to a great extent, and how capitalism in itself deprives people, in some cases, I'd say in many cases, of their fundamental rights.
Well, that's amazing. I want to go to capitalism in a moment, but Mr. Shuman, in query to your relationship, Guyana, when I say you, your relationship with the European Union, recently the European Union apologized to Guyana because there was a problem with the conveyance of message in terms of support of the budget for Guyana. The European Union had promised $20 billion, and then 5 days later, that sum turned out to be something like $20 million, and not $200 billion. They stated that they were had a problem with the rate of exchange for Guyana to U.S. dollars to the euro. And so I want to ask you, in the sense that Guyana seemingly is dependent on other nations, are there plans or ideas where your budget isn't supported by the European Union, that is supported solely by the Guyanese people?
Well, absolutely. You know, for the longest while, Guyana was looked at as the poorest country, or the second poorest country, next to Haiti. And
Yes.
Haiti is a very unique country. You talk of the European Union, of which France is within the European Union. But yet France in itself had to charge the Haitian nation, a tremendous amount of billions of dollars for their freedom. Now, how do you buy freedom? And it has left Haiti in a state where I don't think even the governance structure works.
Yes.
Now, if you were to look at Guyana at one point, we were deemed to be the poorest nation, the second poorest nation in the Caribbean and in the Western world. That is not because we don't have resources. It is not that we are poor in the sense of the word impoverished per se. It is that our resources have never really been managed properly. The governance structure that was meant to look out for the people's interests never really functioned for the people. And I think what we have seen, you know, we've just gone through a long year, the longest election cycle in the history of the earth, 5 months. And it should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. We've actually just gone by that, and it has been a painful lesson for us as a country that is 54 years old. But right now, we have discovered black gold in Guyana off the shores, oil. We are supposed to be the richest nation per capita on this planet. We have gold, we have bauxite, lumber, rice, sugar, diamonds, rare earth metals, and now we have oil. The one thing that we have never had in Guyana, the one key that we have never had in Guyana is good governance. And it is because of that reason that Guyana has continuously existed on the margins of poverty. And when we talk about the UN and all of these loan tools and all, grants,
Yes.
at some point in the very near future, we will see Guyana not dependent on any single nation for revenues. We will be in a position where our economy becomes self-generating. Of course, what we still need in Guyana is good governance. And we intend on pressing this administration, the PPP's administration, to ensure that they do deliver good governance for the people of Guyana.
Well, it's seemingly in terms of good governance, for the people, by the people in the United States of America, and we are energy independent. We are the most powerful military, the most prosperous nation on the face of the earth. Yet it's not the state that guarantees the individual, it's the individual that guarantees the state. And it seems that that's a vice versa condition in Guyana, where under capitalism here in the United States, where U.S. citizens own 80% of the country and manage all of the productivity of the industries, it seems in Guyana 80% of the industries are owned by the state, 20% by the individuals, and for 54 years you've been practicing communism, first under Soviet rule, and then now under Chinese investment. It doesn't seem that communism is working at all, and that will be the most debilitating thing to Guyana actually taking advantage of all of its resources. What say you to that?
Well, there's a very interesting thing, because you talk about capitalism as though it is the holy grail of governance models. I mean, if you look at the US, there are cities where people have lived in poverty for all their lives, and they perpetually have family members who live in poverty. So capitalism in itself is not the answer. Obviously, communism is not the answer. What needs to happen is a happy marriage between what I'd say a variety of governance structure. There needs to be some degree of socialism, and there needs to be some degree of capitalism. When you've got a country that drives capitalism, what you have are the super rich getting richer and the poor getting even poorer. There must be some state of equilibrium in any country where the country can continuously sustain itself, where people are not dependent on the state. They get to a point of interdependence between their neighbors, their families, and the state. I think ultimately interdependence is what everyone is chasing. If you take, a lot of people talk about communist China. It is a communist country with a capitalist economy. And I think if you look at a lot of Chinese folks, they have a lot of super wealthy Chinese folks. So I don't know that in itself is also the model. When you talk about the ownership of resources and industries in Guyana, that is something that was driven through a PNC, or People's National Congress, led by then President Barnum, to nationalize every single industry, because he wanted the state to control every iota of the country. And what happened when he left office, President Desmond Hoyt, who in my view is one of the greatest presidents in the country, because he brought democracy back to the country, and he started to, what I'd say, divest the state's interests in these industries. He pretty much permitted the economy to flourish. He permitted the private sector to emerge. Granted, he may not have had the economic wherewithal to get it all done, but that is his legacy. And what we are seeing right now is a transformation or a transition from what I call this communist idealism into somewhat of a hybrid between communism and capitalism.
Well, see, one of the problems with hybrids, while the engine you cannot hear, it is also muzzled in terms of its potential. You see, under a free minded, liberty oriented people, this nation, the most powerful and most prosperous independent energy nation in the world, has its ownership by the people and for the people. In addition to that, it is the government which receives revenue from us, and that government, out of our prosperity, is able to pay poor people in this country upwards of $40,000 a year to remain poor. When you take a look at Guyana, the average poor person in Guyana is making 6,000 US dollars per year. If you had greater freedom and greater liberty and opened yourselves to a capitalist nation where the people owned the products, the people owned the industries, they would create a greater sense of revenue to support the poor of and by themselves. And in addition to that, be able to maintain a strong economy and a strong nation. When I ask you in terms of the military question, you will have the second largest resource of oil in the world, only behind the United States. But your military is lacking. Do you not consider yourself a national security threat to not only the U.S., but to other nations around you?
Well, it's you've opened a few doors there. Let's
Thank you.
address the market. Let's address the market side first.
Okay.
I don't disagree that people should be given the opportunity to generate wealth for themselves. I don't disagree with that notion at all. All I'm saying is that there must be some happy margin between what a person can do, and there must be some limiting factor so that we don't end up having people becoming trillionaires with money that they can't spend, and we have people who are begging in the streets. There must be some balance in there. There must be some state of equilibrium. And I quite agree that the people need to own the industry. That is why I say we're in a transformative and transitional state. And we are not there yet, but we are going to get there. In terms of the national security issue, basically the zone within which Guyana falls, if you look at the recent conflicts, what I'd say nation-to-nation conflict in the Western Hemisphere, I don't think that you could name one within the last 50 years, short of the U.S. going into some of these places like the invasion of Grenada, maybe Ecuador, and El Salvador, and a few other places. But outside of that, there has not been a nation-to-nation conflict. So the zone of peace still exists within the Western Hemisphere. And I don't anticipate that Guyana, or I don't see that Guyana becomes a national security threat to anyone. Militarily, of course, we're a small country of 750,000 people. For a country of 750,000 people, what military might do we really need? I think for the larger geopolitical forces, we leave that to the US, to Russia, and China to play that out. We try not to get involved in that. What we want to do is to ensure that the people of Guyana benefit from the resources and benefit from good governance, and that everyone is permitted the opportunity and the latitude to ascend as far as they possibly can, both individually and nationalistically.
Do you feel, and I got to ask you a constitution question right after this, but do you feel that, and I really believe and trust your willfulness in terms of prosperity for your people, but China is hammering down on Guyana, and Russia has always been there, and now Iran is stepping in there, and they're all interested in not only the oil that you have, but the resources that you have, and also a place in which they can establish ports and other things which are in direct geography to the United States of America, which by your statement is supposed to keep the peace for Latin America. Isn't that a bit winsome in terms of a belief, though, when you know that these institutions, like China, which is taking ports away from African nations because they can't pay back the Belt and Road Initiative dollars that they've taken, don't you believe that's a little naive in terms of expecting the U.S. to completely control the peace while you open yourselves up to the threats of the world?
Well, we don't intend on relinquishing our peace to anyone. I think that is for the government of Guyana and the Guyanese people to determine what direction they want to go. But what I will say is that there has been some pushback against, foreign influence in our national policy. When I've said this before, and I will say it again, we will ensure that the people of Guyana benefit from the resources. About a month and a half ago, we had some investors from the U.S. who showed up there and said they're willing to invest up to $200 billion in the country. We have also not permitted China the ability and the authority to come into the country carte blanche. The Russians have always been there. We've always had diplomatic ties with many of these countries, and we don't see that they have gotten a foothold in the Guyana. We haven't seen anyone really gotten a foothold in Guyana, and we are happy with it that way. What we would like to see are a lot more partnerships with a lot more nations that will ensure that we continue to be this moderator, that we continue to stimulate conversations around peace. It is the only way that we could look at global coexistence.
Well, global coexistence works well not only with peace but also with might. I just wanted to advise you of that. You're going to need both someday. Now, in final, your Constitution, and I hope that you'll come back on our program because I really enjoyed our conversation. But Mr. Shuman, your Constitution, according to your state, was to be reviewed some 30 some odd years ago and corrections made to it. There have been complaints by the people of Guyana that the Constitution has yet to be reviewed, that is a committee that hasn't even taken first steps. The Constitution in two places assures the happiness of the Guyanese people, but it doesn't give rights to the individual in that particular sense. When will Guyana review its constitution? Will it always remain a cooperative state, thus taking the state above the individual? And then lastly, do you believe that your state can survive with a continued power centered in the country's elite few and not in the hands of many?
Well, let's start off with the first question, the constitutional question.
Yes.
The Constitution is the way it is because there has been no political will to have it revised. Both political parties, when they're out of office, talk nice about constitutional reform, but when they get in there, they enjoy the powers conferred upon them within the Constitution. We have an executive president that enjoys that power. And basically, when they have power in their hands, why would they want to cede that to anyone? Why would they want to cede it to the people? The president is treated pretty much like the king in Guyana. Very little that they can do and get charged or, anything of the sort. But that being said, the Liberty and Justice Party, along with some other newer parties, we are knocking at that door. We are at the doorstep, and we intend on holding the government to account to ensure that the Constitution is revised. Now, the political question comes into play. In order to revise the Constitution, you need 66% of the House to revise it. When the People's Progressive Party, Civic, is in office, and they would chair the Constitutional Revision Committee, when they table a motion, or they may set some ridiculous hours for the committee to sit, whereby the opposition would not show up. And if they propose to revise the Constitution, then the opposition would be left to shame, and they may not, they'll lose electoral ground in the next election. And likewise, if the opposition proposes constitutional reform, then the government stands to lose electoral grounds in the next election. So there's this bit of playing chicken with the Constitution. What we intend on doing is figuring out how we could break that deadlock between the two parties and ensure constitutional reform becomes a reality. When we get to that point, then we would be able to address the cooperatives, we'd be able to address a variety of articles, inclusive, hopefully, of the executive presidency. I can't remember your second question, sorry.
Yeah, well, no worries. We're going to have you come back and we'll talk about those second questions. But in follow up to that statement there, the problem with the chicken and the egg regarding a communist constitution is that no power is ever ceded enough to change it, which means the people will never be free enough by the will of the state to have power in the land. So when you come back on my program, hopefully in the year, I want to talk with you about the sense that there are people from Berbice to Georgetown who feel that this government doesn't speak to them. And in fact, on the first show that we did regarding the Constitution, 46% of the people that watched that show were open to a constitution that was very similar to the United States of America, if not becoming a part of the United States of America. So I think you all need to take a little time.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, go right ahead.
Let me interrupt you a bit. I don't think that a lot of your viewers and a lot of people in the U.S. understand the origins of the Constitution of the United States of America. There's a little reserve just north of Toronto called the Six Nations Reserve. And when the founders and the drafters of the Constitution of the United States visited there, they saw how the people were living, and believe it or not, the American Constitution is modeled after the Six Nations grouping just north of Toronto here. Now, I don't see that there's a perfect constitution. I think to a great extent when the Canadians were looking at devising their constitution, they foresaw that there would be great difficulties in the American Constitution, and I think some of those things are being played out right now. Pardon me, my daughter is here.
Oh no, that's right. Beautiful young lady.
Yeah, so one of the things, right, there is great difficulty, and if you think of what Donald Trump is trying to do right now, trying to use his executive authority to overturn the elections, to set aside the people's franchise and all these things, and we have to look at the U.S. The U.S., is being touted as the defenders of democracy globally, or the pushers of democracy. That they've got this very strong institutional framework that addresses all these things. But yet here you have the same issues that were attempted in Guyana over the 5 months being pushed in the U.S. Now it would be interesting to see how that gets addressed come January. So we have to be careful. There isn't a very unique model that I think that we could point to that would represent Guyana. We also have to understand that Guyana is a vastly different state from the U.S.
Almost certainly.
We have our own unique difficulties, geographically, ethnically, a whole host of things. So, pardon me, I've got
She's
a little...
gorgeous.
Listen,
yeah. But Mr. Shuman...
So we've got a lot of things wrapped up in there.
Yes, Mr. Shuman, but I must refute what you're saying there. We've had at least 3 elections in the U.S. that were fraudulent. Thomas Jefferson was the first to be elected under our Constitution, where the state legislatures were directly involved. Rutherford B. Hayes was the last in 1876 to be involved. So this is not a unique thing to us under our Constitution. And in fact, our Constitution mandates that the state legislature, not the popular vote, elects our president. So it seems like our founding fathers had kind of thought ahead on this particular thing. Donald Trump is not trying to use any executive order to take away the will of the people. He's applying the Constitution as every other president has been allowed to. Listen, it's tremendous talking with you, Mr. Shuman, and I look forward to talking with you in the new year. Merry Christmas to you and your baby.
Thank you so much. Likewise. I look forward to this discussion continuing.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show, and do have a fantastic Christmas and a New Year.
You too. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
We are honored this particular evening to have had the Honorable Lenox Shuman, and you can tell he's a family man, a man who loves his children, and that's absolutely beautiful. No matter where you are in the world, there's something about the individual and family that supersedes everything else. When we come back from the break, ladies and gentlemen, we will be talking with no one better than Onique Prasad regarding my conversation with the parliamentary member, and also hopes of ending communism in Guyana. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital. We'll be right back with more of the best in urban conservative talk right after this.
President and owner of Henry Repeating Arms. Today we are going to talk about the Henry Mini Bolt Youth Rifle, the official youth rifle of the USA shooting team. Henry Repeating Arms is proud to support all of the nation's youth shooting sports programs, including the Youth Shooting Sports Alliance, the NRA youth programs, the International Hunters Education Association, the Boy Scouts of America, as well as many others. The Henry Mini Bolt is the top-of-the-line youth rifle. Made of stainless steel, it features a stainless steel receiver, barrel, and bolt handle. It's lightweight, only 3¼ pounds, and features Williams fire sights for easy sight alignment. The Henry Mini Bolt is built to withstand the toughest test on earth, your kid. Available in synthetic black stock or Muddy Girl camo pattern. If you are going to spend your hard-earned money on a Henry, you can expect to receive quality, reliability, award-winning customer service, and my personal lifetime guarantee. And most importantly, Henry Repeating Arms, made in America or not made at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital, where we are not ashamed at all of the good news conservatism, but it's the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrant out there. I want to introduce, as some present to others, a young woman who is fighting the good fight to end communism in Guyana. She is none other than Onique Prasad. Ms. Prasad, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I got to ask you here, How did I do with my particular interview with the parliamentary member, Lenox Shuman?
I believe you actually had some excellent questions. Actually.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear me?
That's much better.
Okay, let's try this a little bit better. Okay. So yeah, I think you have some excellent questions from, especially in regards to communism.
Well, thank you. And the
One of the
idealisms.
things that,
Yes,
go
right
ahead,
ahead.
sorry.
No, in the ideals that are being expressed, they seem kind of winsome in the sense that you're waiting for a communist government to end communism. Does that make sense to you?
No,
Okay.
no. So this is one thing that, one of the things that he needs to keep in mind in terms of what we have going on in Guyana. Basically, you know, he's saying that, in a way, he's kind of saying that there's not really communism in Guyana. But let's take a look at who owns all of the economic resources in Guyana.
Yes.
The state does. So what does that make you? A communist nation, correct?
That's correct.
They need to focus more on individual, owned and operated some of these major resources, private citizens, and not the government. Let's take, for instance, the sugar estate. They're all owned and operated by the government.
Yeah.
The mining industry is somewhat privatized, but the bulk of it is given to Oman.
You know, the resources seem to be things that people appreciate more than their individual freedom. Is that because they have spent years under the dominance of the PNC and the PPP?
I think you have a good point. I think you might be onto something there. Yes, exactly.
Because the state seems to value the resources but not the people. I want to ask you, in the case of Berbice, there were
Well,
three...
let's take the Amerindian society, for instance, seeing that you have Shuman on here. For instance, you know, let's look at just that segment of our society.
Yes.
Article 149 says that the government is supposed to, they're obligated to protect the indigenous people, right?
Yes.
Their cultural way of life. Their language, for instance, is not being taught. Their language is disappearing slowly and slowly.
Yes.
How are they preserving their culture when that's actually happening in Guyana?
Yeah.
This is something based, this is just their language. There's enough native people there that can teach that language in the school to the natives.
Now,
I mean, it wouldn't cost a lot to do something like that. Now look at this. They give them 30,000 stipend for the, I guess, the chief. Shuman can attest to that because that's what he used to do prior to what he's doing now.
yes.
What can 30,000 Guyana do for those people a month? 30,000 Guyana. I mean, you know the exchange rate. It's 2-something to 1.
Exactly.
200 and something Guyana dollars to 1 US. That's 30,000 Guyana dollars I'm speaking about.
Exactly. So about $1,500 a month is given to the indigenous people, while their resources are being taken out for large profits by groups from China, from Russia, and from other nations.
Let's look at land title. You know, it's really important that these people have land title to the lands that they're occupying right now.
Yes.
And each government that goes into power, you know, when they're on the campaign trail, oh yeah, we're going to do this. But then once they're back in Parliament again, they forget about it.
Exactly. Is there a disconnect between the people and the elites that are ruling them?
The disconnect with the elite, with the indigenous people, or with the
common people in general?
disconnect with them and the government? Yes.
Okay.
And that's because okay. Take me for example. Okay.
Yes.
My father used to own and operate a food and manufacturing company in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
He became a millionaire at 25 because he got the GDF contract to provide a survival pack. And how did he get it? From a friend. A friend knows this person, whatever. So that's kind of how business is done in Guyana. It's what private company knows who in government.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a lot of the private company, they have direct relations with whoever is in power at that point in time.
You know, it seems a bit ominous that there are individuals who wake up every morning with a fresh idea from the Lord, and they want to use resources to build their own company and hire their own people and make their own wealth and take care of their families and the poor amongst them. And yet they're told every single day, don't do that, the state will do it for you. What does that eventually create on the streets of Georgetown and Berbice?
Don't do it, the state will do it for you.
Yes.
So again, let's go back to my father. When he started his company, there was ban on certain products. For instance, anything that was imported, let's say like Jello.
Yes.
They had a ban on that. They had a ban on any flour. They had a flour. This is during the Burnham administration. They had a ban on flour, split peas, etc. Right?
Yes.
So a lot of food manufacturers start to substitute some of the products that was made with these ingredients. And then, you know, let's say like shake and bake, for instance. You need, you know, flour to go into the mixture. So because my father was friends with the government, he was able to bring the product in, backtrack through Suriname, and the police literally would let it go.
Mm.
There's been instances where he was stopped. Well, not him, people that work with him, they would stop, and all they had to do is make a phone call to my dad make a phone call to Duncan Clark, and everything is all okay. The boat goes with the product. So these business people work hand in hand with the government, so they really don't have a voice, because then the government sabotaged their business.
Exactly.
Just like they do in Russia, just like they do in China, just like they do in Iran.
Exactly. There seems to be a misunderstanding of capitalism amongst the Guyanese people, including the deputy speaker. When you say capitalism, Onique, what exactly is capitalism?
Are you referring to what is capitalism in Guyana specifically?
No, in reality, what is capitalism?
Well, I can give you a couple description of what it is, and kind of related to Guyana. So, for instance, number one, in a capitalist society, individuals have a right to, you know, like we spoke about previously on the show, liberty, you know, free will to do as they please, kind of like breaking it down to layman terms.
Yes.
In Guyana, there's not necessarily such thing in terms of freedom. The freedom that you have in Guyana is what the government allows you to have. Recently, we had a case in Guyana where someone was killed via one of the APNU individual literally hit this one Guyana's national cyclist, right? And he got out of those charges because he's in government. Now, if it was the other way around, where it was a common citizen, that person would have went to jail, correct?
Yes, exactly.
But because this man who committed this crime is part of the government, he went off scot-free.
Wow.
Right? So for me, that's corruption, right?
Exactly.
And in most communist society, that's the kind of things that happen. In the U.S., if that person was tried here, it would be harder for him to get off like that.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And like I mentioned earlier, a communist society, the government owns all the economic resources. In terms of, market, we had talked about this before, about the market economy with business, where you had mentioned that in terms of allowing the people to, like the farmers, for instance,
yes,
to be able to, negotiate their own deals, etc. Do you recall you had mentioned that to me?
Yes. Yes.
On the show? The Guyanese people necessarily, the Guyanese farmers don't have that ability.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because then you will have the deputy speaker say that the Chinese have the same capitalism we do, and that Guyana is moving towards the same capitalism that we have, and that's not the case at all. Farmers here make their own deals, and they sell their own foods across the world and locally and regionally. And so there are many people who are missing out on profit and freedom and happiness because they're depending on the state to define for them what is capitalism, what is socialism, and what is communism. And China and Iran and Russia have no concept of what capitalism is.
Well, I mean, you talked to Shuman, and as you were speaking to him, I mean, he made some valid points, but in regards to, for instance, when he was talking about the Constitution, in the American Constitution and how it was created, he kind of lost me there in terms of,
Well, that was a statement to say that the Iroquois, the indigenous people, impacted the founding fathers in creating the U.S. Constitution, which they may or may not have, but there were 60 men in a room in Philadelphia that said, we have got to make certain that our people are free and that we have a strong government. And that's how the Constitution was created, and later on the Bill of Rights added. But only the amendments added more liberty and freedom. I don't see Guyana depending on the government to give them more liberty and freedom. So what will the people eventually do when they realize that their government is taking 80% of the oil money and using it for themselves?
So I'm going to answer that question, but I kind of want to answer what you had asked me originally in terms of capitalism, right?
Yes.
So I think capitalism is the ability to walk through any door that you see, achieve as high as you want to. The previous speaker, he said that capitalism is not good because you have rich and poor, and that's a misconception of what it can do. In other words, he was talking about people like Jeff Bezos and all these other guys that have all these, mass amount of money, and the smaller guys don't have anything, right? That's what he's basically saying. And to me, that's a misconception. In communism, socialism, there's still rich and poor, and there's no chance for a poor person to achieve. In capitalism, the poor can rise up, they can take themselves out of poverty if they choose to do so. In Guyana, when, you know, a lot of people in Guyana don't have that choice. In America, you can come here like I did with nothing and work your way up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't need any, I don't know anybody in politics here in the government. You know, I didn't have to get to know anybody in my local government so I can start a company.
Yes.
In Guyana, it's kind of like that. You have to know somebody to be able to, you know, get anywhere.
Exactly.
And you have to know somebody in the government.
Well, for those people,
and to me, that's not fair.
For those people who are watching in Guyana tonight, or whenever they watch this video tape, I want to ask you, first and foremost, is the state producing an environment where the people will eventually seek to overthrow it, number one? And number two, how can people pursue liberty and freedom in a state so static and so communistic?
Well, you know, Guyanese would never try to overthrow the government. They're very passive in terms of something like that.
Yes.
However, I think that if we educate the Guyanese people on, like, you know, the Constitution and how it works for them and how it doesn't, if we educate them about the style of governance that they've gone through, you know, from, you know, the British to Chetty Jagan to Burnham, etc., they will see that they have, as a citizen, they have a responsibility to make sure that this style of governance stops, and they get a chance to vote every 4 or 5 years, so they can make those choices then based on, you know, making sure that whomever they put in power, number one, will keep their promise, and indeed rewrite, you know, fix the Constitution to benefit the people, number one. Number two, in terms of the state resources, they need to make sure that the government is not the only, you know, they need to privatize them.
Yes, exactly. Onique, we love you and we appreciate you so much for what you do for ending communism in Guyana. They can find you on Facebook, End Communism in Guyana. We want to wish you the very merriest of Christmases and the happiest of New Year's. We'll see you in the new year. Thank you, Onique.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, listen, we got to take a commercial break. When we come back, hopefully we'll be talking with Janis Hall, the J Hall World Report, and as well talking about the COVID-19 bill that Donald Trump will have to allow to either expire or veto on his desk, because he is not going to give billions of dollars to Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these other great nations for gender studies. Just not going to do it. Listen, we'll be back right after this.
Children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
p.m. Do you know where your children are?
I'm Paul Stanley of KISS. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
I'm Councilman Eric Joya. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Help make a safer, stronger DC. Whether it's a missing person, an unsolved homicide, or keeping citizens safe, there are a number of cases that are still unsolved. Please take a moment to listen to this one.
On Wednesday, May 27, 2015, at approximately 9:40 p.m., 27-year-old D.C. resident Janis Milton was shot and killed in the 2700 block of Good Hope Road Southeast. The victim, a journalist for Capital Community News, was changing buses on her way home from covering a meeting. Police believe someone on a dirt bike fired at Ms. Milton, but that she was not the intended target. The Metropolitan Police Department currently offers a reward of up to $25,000 to anyone that provides information which leads to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons wanted for any homicide in the District of Columbia.
If you have information about this case, contact the Metropolitan Police Department, 202-727-9099, and an anonymous text number, 50411.
This morning, the fourth homicide happened within the city since just this past Sunday, and Chief Eric Jones says there are some unique and alarming trends behind the killings. In an RV trailer on a vacant lot near downtown, Nick Worrell and his wife Christine call this home for now.
People are losing their jobs. People can't afford to pay their bills. We can't get another stimulus check. It's taking forever.
No longer in a tent, Worrell is one of the more fortunate ones. However, Stockton's homeless population has seen 6 homicides this year, contributing to a spike in deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. Why?
What we've noticed is some of those encampments left sort of unchecked over a long period of time may have a tendency for narcotics dealing, prostitution, other types of things to take root there.
Overall, there have been 49 homicides to date. That compares to 32 at the same time last year. 15 homicides are domestic related. According to Chief Jones, a normal number is 1 or 2 per year.
And this is one reason we're working so strongly and collaboratively with our Family Resource and Family Justice Center, with the District Attorney's Office, participating in a domestic violence task force, working with a lot of the nonprofits and organizations throughout the city to reduce that type of violence.
Other homicides include 9 group or gang related, 7 robbery or narcotics related, and 12 other or unknown related.
We really do feel, had we not been doing a lot of this hard work with the collaboration between the Office of Violence Prevention and the Police Department, who knows what our numbers would be.
And that 49th homicide happened this morning around 5:30 near Mount Diablo and I-5. A man was shot and killed. No arrests have been made.
Hi, we're the Mooney family, and we're staying here at the Westgate Lakes Resort in Orlando, Florida. I was initially skeptical about bookvip.com because the price was so reasonable. But for only $198, we got a beautiful 2-bedroom condo, 2 full bathrooms, kitchen, living room, and laundry facilities.
Don't forget the washer and dryer.
Oh yes, gotta love it.
How much did we save?
We saved over $800 just on lodging alone, which allowed us to all go and enjoy Universal Studios Orlando.
Yay! So let's show you our living room and the master bedroom.
Come. Let's go. We're gonna start with the master bedroom.
Oh.
Here's the bed. The big bed. And then there is the hot tub or jacuzzi, whichever one you want to call it. In the living room, let's take a look. Oh, wait, there's a TV in here. And then the nice living room. And then...
Get a shot at the cookies?
Oh.
They even give us complimentary cookies.
Complimentary cookies.
Thanks,
BFP. I thought we just... Thanks, book. Thanks, bookvip.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the second hour of the Exceptional Conservative Show, live from the nation's capital. We certainly are not ashamed of the good news of conservatism, for it is the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrant. It was great having a member of Guyana's parliament on our program this particular evening, none other than the Honorable Lenox Shuman, who is also chairman of the Liberty and Justice Party. And as well, we had Onique Prasad, who is part of, actually the head of Stop Communism in Guyana, on with us. In the second hour, we are awaiting Janis Hall, the J Hall World Report. We have a lot of stories to go over in this particular juncture regarding foreign policy and exactly the stations of life for many countries around the world regarding the pandemic COVID-19, which is China flu or Wuhan flu, however way you wish to say it. But one of the things I do want to make in terms of commentary in this particular hour is that I do not purport myself to be an expert on the constitutions of every nation in the world. I just don't. I don't have that magnitude of wisdom. I can easily ascertain knowledge of it, but in terms of mastery of it and understandings, I don't have it. But when it comes to the U.S. Constitution, and I really believe that our Constitution is much better than any other constitutions. In fact, it's the oldest Constitution on record right now. And that means that it's worked. 54 years of the Guyanese Constitution, that's 300 pages long, has not worked. Ours has lasted over 250 some odd years. It has worked, and it's working ever more gracefully in this particular time period. We're not a democracy. For those who are tuning in from around the world, we are not a democracy. While democracy may be a subsect of what we are, it is not who we are. We are a republic, and we are a federated constitutional republic. Our Constitution is the law of the land. Just because people like to make up laws along the way, doesn't make their law the law of the land. Our Constitution serves as the law of the land, and under Article 1 1 of our Constitution, our Congress has certain responsibilities to be met, one of which has to do with elections. And as Article 1 indicates to you, the most preferred and powerful branch of the 3 branches, all of them are co-equal in their powers. But the reason why our founding fathers wanted the Article 1 to be about Congress was to let the people know that they were the rulers of the land. Not an elite group in New York on Wall Street, not a ruling morass out of Capitol Hill, and not the global elitists out of Hollywood and the UN. Our founding fathers wanted to make certain that you understood, and I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that the UN did not exist, nor Hollywood or Wall Street when our founding fathers, well, maybe a little bit of Wall Street, but not to the degree. But nonetheless, our founding fathers understood that there would be terrorists and threats to our republic, both foreign and domestic, and that the best way for our people to keep this governance was, number one, to maintain a godly nation, Christianity being the preferred of all faiths and religions, and then number two, to be very cognizant of the fact that it is the states who have the electoral rights, not the people. And you might want to say, hey, well, wait a minute, what about the will of the people? What the will of the people? Well, the will of the people were the ones who elected the state legislatures. You see how this works? For the United States of America, the will of the people is to elect the state legislatures. It is the state legislatures outside of the Electoral College when there are cases of fraud, like 1876 with Rutherford B. Hayes. They are responsible for being the end-all and be-all, not the Electoral College. While it would be rude and disgusting and distasteful and destructive to our Constitution to eradicate the Electoral College is to protect the small states from being overtaken by the large states. Texas, Alaska, California, New York. Those large states will have significant power over the smaller states, Delaware, Rhode Island, Iowa. That's why you have the Electoral College. It's about the states' rights. It's not about your popular vote. You see, you might note that a lot of countries move towards a popular vote, and then through voter irregularities, those particular states maintain a dominance of governance over the rule of the people. Our founding fathers understood that and did not want that. Our founding fathers wanted to make certain that the will of the people and that the power of the people was as local as that you could possibly get. And that locality being within their state, within their city. You pick the people that will eventually pick the President of the United States of America. And gosh darn it, we're doing it again. And you know what? Our country will survive and continue to go on. In this particular country, there is no king and there is no monarch. And the president does not serve in the capacity of a king or monarch, as he is subject to the Constitution, subject to Congress, and subject to the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court is subject to the Constitution, subject to the president, and subject to Congress, and Congress is subject to the Constitution, subject to the president, and subject to the Supreme Court. You see, they're all working simultaneously to keep law and order, to prevent one from dominating the other. However, in countries and in parties like the Democrat Marxist Party of the United States of America, they are bent on the whole narrative that the will of the people is based on a popular vote and popularity rules. Our founding fathers said, popularity does not rule, because when they got to the Mayflower and got off of it, communism was popular, but it ended in death and destruction of the colony. You see, a free people prosper, and they never have to worry about corruption or ill-begotten advances from external forces. We, my friends, are not after your oil. We're not after your resources. We're not after any of that stuff from you all. We got more than enough. Too much. Overflow. God has blessed us. Now it's America's time to bless God. However, in order to be a free people, and in order to encourage freedom throughout the world, we must maintain a peace that comes through strength, not weakness, not naivety, not this idea that idealistic foreign powers will come by and keep us at peace. That doesn't happen. Eventually, you shall be invaded. Our founding fathers wanted to make certain that those in the Western Hemisphere enjoyed the prosperity that we created and to enjoy the strength of our resources that we pay our taxes for. The whole idea that NATO exists is because of the taxes that we pay to our government, in which we provide more than 96% of the funding for NATO. We provide more than 90% of the funding for the United Nations. So, does it make sense to you that we allow others to define our Constitution to us? Heavens to Betsy, no. In fact, Betsy Walsh will be very upset with us, as she spent a lot of time knitting that flag. No, I will tell you what our Constitution says, or I will find the people to tell you that. But we're not going to send messages out to the world which are narratives of the politics of totalitarianism, and authoritarianism, and communism, and socialism. Our Constitution is very few pages, something like maybe like 25 pages at the very most. And I do mean at the very, I need to go back and take a look at it. I think when you add the Declaration of Independence, it's like 25 pages. It's a very small document, but it made us the most powerful people in the world. There are countries with very extensive volumes called their Constitution, and they're weaker than any of us. The one thing I would tell you as a country is the one that keeps God first will always prosper. Ladies and gentlemen, without a shadow of a doubt, this is the period of time that I enjoy most. It is when Janis Hall joins us. And in this particular hour, there are enough rumblings around the world about COVID-19. And I'm quite certain that Janis has a lot of information for us tonight. Janis, first and foremost, Merry Christmas to you and to yours this holiday season.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you too.
Thank you very much. Do you know, tomorrow in the District of Columbia, the mayor of the city has proclaimed it not Christmas Eve, but Anthony Fauci Day.
Sure, okay. Yeah, it's Christmas Eve. I mean, they can say whatever they want, but it's Christmas Eve.
They chose Anthony Fauci over Christmas. You gotta love these leftists.
That's the state of the world, isn't it?
You gotta love them. You gotta love them. Janis, you're getting ready for Christmas, of course, and everyone is excited about the upcoming Biden administration. I meant that. So, I want to ask you, however, about Israel first. We're getting word that Israel failed to pass a budget, and as a result, they have to have a new election. Is that true?
That is true. So Israel, for the past couple of years, has had, and we've talked about this before, has had a real problem forming a government in their parliamentary system, and in a government that can function and that everybody in Parliament's happy with. And it looks like they're going to go back to elections. They've had several elections in the past few years, and they're going to have another one in March. And I would like to say that maybe this will resolve things, but I'm guessing it probably won't. I mean, I think that to some degree Israel sees, I mean, part of what we see, you know, here and everywhere else, especially in Europe, is just kind of a fracturing of, you know, different sides and nobody wanting to, you know, get nobody essentially wanting to make any concessions, nobody wanting to talk to anybody. And so, no, I really, yeah, they'll have elections. I don't think it'll be definitive again. And Benjamin Netanyahu will, I mean, he'll continue to be prime minister until March and probably even after. And we'll have to see.
Isn't it amazing that the Israelis are bent on getting rid of Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it that he's done so poorly at home that no one's interested in Benjamin taking control, or is it just the demographics that people have moved away from a conservative model and closer to the more liberal model in the Likud?
Well, so there's several things going on. He's been there a long time, and so I think that there's probably some desire to, you know, get some new, fresh blood in, and I do understand that. There's been some, I mean, they've tried to go after him for corruption, which I'm skeptical about, given the fact that essentially if you're not a communist, you are essentially, you know, tarred and feathered as a terrible, corrupt person. So I'm not entirely sure that there's a lot there, other than they're just trying to go after him. And then I think there's kind of been a splintering in both ways. Yeah. There's been some people who are, you know, to the right of him and the Likud party, and then there's been some people to the left. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and I think kind of like everywhere else, it's very hard to kind of know who's winning. Exactly.
Which gives instability at a time of a great need of stability, especially in the Middle East. I'm just not getting it. Israel's winning. Why you want to change the team now? You know what I'm saying? They're winning peace agreements. Saudi Arabia is coming up next if the Trump administration stays in office, giving peace. I mean, it just seems so erratic at a time when they shouldn't be. I don't. It's inconceivable to me. Do you feel the same way?
Well, I mean, it's pretty inconceivable that we could have the greatest president almost ever in Trump, and he doesn't get elected again. So there's a lot of inconceivable things happening these days.
Exactly.
Unbelievable things, in fact. And when I say unbelievable, I generally mean that quite literally. It is unbelievable.
Did you know that our population of voters increased 11 million on election night? No other country could ever say they did that.
No, it's very impressive. Yes.
That makes Donald Trump the greatest president ever, because we produced so many voters in one night. Amazingly.
Yep.
They hadn't even been born, and yet they voted. This is a great country.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, let's not forget the dead. The dead, I mean, they were just so excited to vote. They were out there in force.
Oh my God. Growing number of GOP lawmakers back the Electoral College. Is Mitch McConnell trying to dump Donald Trump at this point?
No, Mitch McConnell is basically just being his normal swampy self. And I think without anybody like Trump there, most of the people in the Republican Party who are part of the swamp are going to go back to being the swamp monsters. So what's going on with the election is what they're trying to do is they're trying to get several Republicans in the House to essentially contest the electoral votes. Yes. And it's very unlikely that this will actually lead to anything because the Republicans don't have the majority. But they're looking at it as a way to signal that they're not, we don't buy what we're being sold.
Now, the senator from Alabama has come forward and stated that he will contest in the U.S. Senate. At least 20 congressmen, Republican congressmen in the House of Representatives have stated that they would contest so that the contested delegates will have way and sway over the Electoral College, which can happen. But what is the likelihood of that happening? Do you believe that Mike Pence would stand up there and accept the Electoral College, knowing that we produced 11 million voters in one night that didn't exist beforehand, and they all voted for Biden?
Yeah, they did. So I have probably a slightly different perspective on this than a lot of other and I think that Pence probably will essentially certify the elections, and I think he will probably, barring anything else happening, say that Biden has won. And I don't necessarily think that that's the wrong thing to do, and I don't necessarily think that we should that we should be angry at him for doing that. And here's my reasoning.
Okay.
That a lot of people, have to, in order for us to get to this point that Biden's apparently going to be president, Republicans have had a lot of failures. We failed on election day, or even before that, we failed at getting, good. We failed at getting the voter rolls purged, right? We failed at having good consent laws. We failed at getting rid of vote harvesting and the mail-in ballots. And then on election day, we, essentially failed at keeping everybody accountable and not letting fraudulent votes go in. And, we generally have failed in terms of the legislatures and getting anything there. So I think that there's been a lot of failure to get to this point, and I think that it's to some degree a little unreasonable to expect that, Pence should fix everybody, all of the failures that have happened up to then, especially with no clear benefit for it. So that's what I expect to happen, and if that's what happens, I'm not gonna be upset. I think it's okay. I think what we should be doing now is looking at it as if, okay, should we have won? Absolutely. Do I think we won? Yes, I do. But ultimately, that is not what happened. So I think we step back, we look at it logically, and we figure out what are we going to do from here on out that fixes the problems that we have. Because just complaining about it isn't going to do that. And that's what I have been complaining about. That's what I have been criticizing the Democrats for 4 years, as complaining about an election that they lost. And even if, they think that they actually won it, the fact was as Trump became president and they needed to look to the future and what they were going to do given that reality. And that's not what they did. They just continued to complain.
Yeah, see, but by that line, we are essentially admitting a fraudulent election took place and that our congressmen did not have the courage, our state legislatures did not have the courage, our Supreme Court did not have the courage to deal with it constitutionally. And the last strike of the match constitutionally is the certification on the 6th. And I just feel it's kind of like my conversation with the parliamentary member from Guyana in the last hour. You're asking the communist nation to get rid of communism to install capitalism. And we're asking a corrupt Congress, a corrupt court, to do all the things necessary to make sure that they're not corrupt. It is not going to happen that way. If we allow this election to stand, there will never be again a Republican House or Senate of any appreciable difference. Everything will be thrown out the window. The Constitution will no longer apply, and we're basically throwing out the entire Constitution on this particular election. I just see it as this is the nuclear option here. You gotta go with it. No matter what happens, you just gotta play the nuclear option because you got all the numbers in your place. Where am I definitively erred here?
I don't think that that's necessarily an error. I think, and I totally understand what you're saying, and I definitely think that there is justification and merit with that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that there's no right answer with this.
Yeah.
I think it's just, it's a kind of a matter of preference and what do I think is going to be best in the long run? What do you think is going to be best in the long run? And I don't think that there's necessarily a right or right answer to this. My counterpoint though would be that I think we've already thrown out the Constitution. I think that we have to essentially assume that the state legislatures don't have either the power or the will to essentially fix themselves, that the Supreme Court, again, doesn't have the will to make constitutional judgments. So I think that I am admitting that these legislatures and everybody involved in this process is essentially corrupt and is a problem, and the Constitution has been destroyed. And I don't think if we let it's not about if they get away with it. I mean, they basically have already gotten away with it, and I basically think the Constitution is already been torn up to shreds. And even if we somehow, come back and get, Trump to be president again for the next 4 years, that's great. I still want that to happen.
Yep.
But the problem is still way, way bigger than that. And I think that we've already crossed the Rubicon. I think that we're already there.
Wow. This is wild. Because you've been with me for 7 years, and we've been talking about all these other countries and their issues, and right here at home is the issue of if we're going to keep the Constitution. And I've lived. The
answer to that, I would say, is no. I mean, we currently, we don't, and I think that we've already made that decision. So it's not, we're not even really discussing it anymore. It's already done. It's already been thrown out.
So what replaces the U.S. Constitution? Because if Pence doesn't do what he is required by the Constitution to do, contest delegates, because there is a contesting from the Senate and a contesting from the House, with delegates from 7 different states saying that they are the real delegates and not the Electoral College delegates. If he doesn't pull this, what replaces our Constitution? What do we do? Is there a revolution that takes place? What exactly happens from here, Janis?
Well, I mean, anything happens from here. If you take out, and that's what's so dangerous about it, right? That's why it's such a bad idea to throw something like the Constitution out. Because when you essentially throw the rule book out, there aren't any rules anymore. And anything is possible. And that could either be really good or that could be really bad. But I think that's sort of where we are. And what replaces it? I mean, I hope we have something. I hope we have, I hope we can provide the country with, with religion, with good values, with essentially the Constitution as it should be. I hope we can do all of that. But, I'm not altogether convinced that, that's what will happen. Well, I will say this, though.
Yeah.
I will say this, that I do believe that ultimately we will prevail, just because I believe in God, and I believe that is what will happen.
There you go. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But it is a scary thing to think that the nation with the most powerful military in the world will allow a corrupt election to take place, the Constitution to be fettered, and leave it to the American press and the left to determine our direction from there. We are in a sad sort as a nation, and that does not bode well for the future in terms of a short-term peaceful future. If Pence doesn't do what he's supposed to do, I see a very, very terrible future ahead for the United States of America. And I'm not trying to be, sad sack and that I'm, envious and all the other accusations that are made by the left. Just get over the election, even though they never got over 2016. I just think we just shattered right before everyone's eyes the entire Constitution, and the rest of the world is looking at us and saying, "And you want to lead us?" Am I right about this, Janis?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep. Yep. I mean, I think that the Constitution had a tremendous amount of cracks in it, and it was essentially, barely holding together before the election. And then the election just was like, okay, we're done. Now we're just going to shatter it into a million pieces. And I would say that I don't think that it's necessarily... I guess I'm slightly more fatalistic, and that I don't necessarily see it as an if this happens, then that'll be good or that will be bad. I pretty much see the future as just generally being bad, kind of regardless.
Wow. So even if we kept the Constitution and Mike Pence does what's constitutionally correct, as has been done in 1876, and in 2 other elections where the vice president said, we're not going to go this way. Even if he does do that, does that bode well for the United States of America? Is that because of fear of riots and looting and things of that nature?
No, it's not because of that. That's simply a symptom. The problem is that we have, at the very minimum, 2 very strong, ideologically, hell-bent sides that are, willing to do anything, for that side. And I guess I don't see us living together, basically. So,
are we getting divorced?
Well, I mean, yes. And I know we're wrapping up for the evening, but I mean, there is a point in time when a divorce is necessary and good. And I think that if you entered into something, then you should be able to leave that thing. And, there are obviously a lot of problems with, fracturing up, the U.S. and saying, okay, well, you're going to be this country and you're going to be that country. But, I mean, quite honestly, I don't really know how else to fix the problem since, the left doesn't want to live under the Constitution and we don't want to live there's no overlap there.
Exactly. So, do we get to China? Do we as conservatives get to China if we're going to be, just because I want to get the China out of this. No.
Okay.
Do we get the button? Can we keep the button for the nuclear stuff?
Okay, we can. I think we should keep the button. Yeah.
Thank you. The sane people will keep the button.
Yes.
Janis, we love you. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thank you for this great discussion on our Constitution. It's needed at this season. I haven't heard anyone else talk about it this way. I'm glad we were able to do it. And we keep
Merry Christmas.
We keep the nuclear.
Yeah.
Can I have control of the nuclear, or is that going to be given to somebody else? We love you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got to do a quick break. When we come back, I got to say goodnight and goodbye. Hang in there.
Citizens Legal Defense Network in 2008, and we put this together for us. The concept was that if one of us armed citizens are involved in a self-defense incident, then we have a network of individuals behind that person in order to help them get through the legal fight, if necessary, after the incident.
Deal with the aftermath of a deadly force encounter where they have survived the initial fight to save their lives and are now working very hard to be able to save their futures as well.
What really has impressed me is the boots on the ground side of it. Having had some small part in some of the cases where ACLDN has come in and helped people who are in trouble, I've seen Marty Hayes' vision for this organization fulfilled.
Last year, one of my students had called upon me, ACLDN services, after he was forced into a fatal defensive shooting. He was guided through the process. His rights were protected by a network-provided attorney, and got through the entire legal process without any real difficulties. Now it's behind him. He's able to move on with his life.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to wish you all a very good night. Mrs. Biggs, muchas gracias. Love you dearly. Thank you so much for all of your support. Mary Brockman, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for being in that chat role tonight. Janis Hall, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for your words and your wisdom. Muchas gracias. Onik Prasad, thank you so much for being here and talking about socialism, communism, and real capitalism. My boy, no, I can't call him my boy, we're not like that, but in all honor and due respect to the Member of Parliament, the National Assembly of Guyana, Lenox Shuman, thank you so much for coming on board tonight and talking with us. Listen, for everyone who tuned in tonight, we want to wish you the most positive and successful and holy Merry Christmas that you've ever had in your entire life. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m. we'll begin our medley of movies leading into, of course, It's a Wonderful Life at 7. We want you to come on back, stay tuned, and we got some other great programming on for the rest of the weekend. Great movies, great conversation. You're watching the best in urban conservative talk, news, and movies. It's called TECNTV.com. Merry Christmas, y'all. Good night. If you don't remember anything else I said, sorry. Do remember, God bless America. It is now time for America to bless God.